IMA and DB and the Associate Medical Director of ENT and Head of the Safety Committee in Shop Charity Eye Hospital in Daryaganj. We're talking about a very pertinent topic in today's time and a much, I would say, something that's up for debate among the medical fraternity, and that is the need for boosters. So, as always, Dr. Nidhi,
Did we lose her? I think we lost Meenakshi.
I'm so sorry. I think there was a network issue.
Yeah, I think we lost you there.
So I don't know what you heard. So did you start? Can we start off? Have I introduced the topic?
No, we just sort of heard that we are talking about the need to boosters. So I think we
Right.
can.
Yeah. So Dr. Nidhi, as always, she's chosen a very pertinent topic, and it's up for debate among the medical fraternity. So let's hear you out, Dr. Nidhi.
All right. So here goes Meenakshi. So, interestingly, we've been hearing cases up 21%, cases up 100%, cases doubled. But what we forget is two things, I feel, in this equation. One, of course, when you're starting off with 0, even 1 is 100% increase. So it depends on what baseline you are computing the increase on. And second, coronaviruses, and even the common cold virus is a coronavirus. Coronaviruses have been with us for a very long time, and they have very special immunological profile. So they will keep coming and going. Till they are novel, they are a problem. Once we develop an immune memory for them, they are just another virus. So following numbers, while we've gotten used to tracking every number that we get, may not be the right way forward. And hence also, we need to change the way we look at this virus now, going ahead and talking about protection from it. So, guilty as charged, even we have been doing this for a very long time now, but no talk about COVID is complete without at least going over what happened in the last few weeks. And I've tried here to trace the time still since Omicron. So if we look at December 25th, when we think Omicron was just emerging, India had about 5 cases per million, and UK had about 1.5 thousand cases per million. US and Israel have been, and why I include Israel in the whole thing is because Israel has a very unique position. We'll come to that a little later. Despite almost universal immunization, despite a physically fit country, like they have conscription and everybody's trained physically to be fit to fight, despite boosting even up to 4 shots, Israel's numbers, if you look at the green curve, have always been the highest in the world, with the smallest population out of this cohort. And so January, when Omicron was peaking, Israel was at its highest, about 11,000 cases per million. US was about 2,000 cases per million. UK was staying, where it was in December, about 1,500 cases. India rose up to about 225 cases per million at that time. A month later, from 225, India went down to 10. From 10,000, Israel went down to 1,200, 1,300. US and UK hovering between 200 to 500, 600. They had been in the four figures earlier. February to March, Israel is still staying on top, about 1,500. UK about 1,200. US came down. And India came further down from 10 to 1 over the next month or so in March. India stayed in the single digits in April, in May, and in June. And then in the end of June, we see that India has risen from 1 in May to about 10 by the end of June. Interestingly, the thing that we hear all over the place is that we're not testing enough. So let's look at that statistic. India had to do about 470 tests to get their first positive in April. Israel had to do 5 tests to get their first positive. That was the level of community prevalence. US had to do 33, UK 10. So if you're looking at that, it's not as if we were not testing enough. India by May had come down to about 190. We had to do 190 tests to come to the first positive case. But in June, we came down to 35. So we did 35 tests and we hit our first positive in June, which means that the presence of COVID in the community was much higher. If you look at Israel, that's 5 tests. Then in May, they rose to 23. That means the community transmission became a little less. And then in June, they have dropped to 3, which means that it is more. And we are still about 10 times safer than Israel, despite their quadruple vaccination. The other measure that we use to see the community presence, let's look at the effective reproduction rate, or the R0 of the virus. When we look at the R0, we find that UK has an R0 of about 1.3, Israel 1.3, India 1.2, and US 1.08, which means that all these countries that we are currently examining do have some growth of numbers, and none of them is in the 0 or the negative growth rate. Also indicates that the virus has largely become endemic, and the way to now examine the effect of the virus on the economy, on the population, on the administration would be to see how the healthcare is responding to it, and is the healthcare getting overwhelmed? Is the economy getting overwhelmed with the presence of the virus that has become largely endemic? If you look at the time when the lockdowns began, you find that India is at the highest R0. It has crossed about 2. This we are talking about March 2020. The US is at 2. Israel at this time is approaching 2, but on a downward slope. And India is the only one which is showing a rising slope. The rest of them are all showing a downward slope. If you look at what happened in May, you see that India is still the highest at about 1.5, whereas US, UK, and Israel are all either less than 1 or kind of approaching 1. This was the time that we were going to be hit by a wall of bricks. This was just pre-Delta. If we look at Delta then, India about 1.5, Israel about 1.7, US and UK, they were at about a 1 here. Now, interestingly, at this time, April, May, June, we were hitting our highest numbers. We had hit 400,000 a day, and we were getting bad press from all over the world. India doesn't know how to manage the pandemic. India is going to face huge numbers, huge deaths. And it was a bad wave. It was a traumatic experience for everyone running for oxygen and etc., etc. But if we look at how the world has evolved ever since, you see that infections have followed certain waves. The Omicron has been the tallest wave in terms of numbers. This seems to be where we are right now. Seems like we are headed for another rise, and it seems to be driven by another variant out of Omicron family. However, the deaths that we saw in the initial waves, particularly Delta, and that's all over the world, are nowhere near what we are seeing now with Omicron. The deaths here, again, seem to be more related to the comorbidities rather than per se to the effect of the virus itself. Even if we were to examine the top 5 countries that are showing rising numbers, US more than 100,000 even today, and a steep rise. Germany 85,000, France 71,000, Italy 65,000, Brazil 56,000. These are the countries which are still showing the most new infections each day. And this is from Reuters registry. They use national health reports from the various countries that they compile. With the most number of deaths each day, US is still at the head of the chart with about 450 deaths per day. Brazil, Taiwan, Germany, and Russia, the deaths have now started going down. The new infections reported per region, the European region is still at the top, with Latin America, North America coming close behind. This here, the yellowish, mustardish part is Asia. In the last month, it appears like Asia has been showing rising numbers. But look at Africa. I mean, you can barely see the white. If you see the trends in India, you see that the graph is going up. And if I was to follow the previous waves, you see that this slope is roughly this slope. So we just have to wait and see whether it will taper off, whether it will rise, and to what level it will rise. But if we have to look at deaths, the deaths are hugging the baseline. The health systems haven't been overwhelmed, and the experts everywhere in the world are puzzled as to why um, India is having the kind of picture it is having. Let's look at what effect lockdowns have had on the pandemic. At present, as of 12:47 yesterday, midday, India reported 7 infections per 100,000 in the last 7 days as a rolling average. It was at 4% of its peak of 400,000 a day and rising. If you look at the key here, the key will show you the orange is required closing all but emergency services, and the orange is closing some sectors. The narrower line shows local, regional closures, and the broader band shows national closures. Now, if you look at March 2020, when the lockdown started, there were very strict lockdowns, but we still hit the Delta wave. By Delta wave, we were still having some level of interstate activity. It was not very strict. But here, look at this. When we recommended closure at a national level because we were expecting, no, this is the Wuhan, right? This is the Wuhan strain. This is the Delta strain. So we completely shut down our economic activity, and yet Delta did what it had to. Then we largely kind of opened up, and with Omicron, there have been no lockdown measures. This, we've completely forgotten about what lockdown looks like. There is no data, in fact, कि हम कहीं lockdown कर भी रहे हैं. Now, if you look at what the present numbers are, the present numbers are 10,000, 15,000. And you look at what the lockdown status is, the society is open. The variant is extremely contagious. And yet, these are the numbers in the last 6 months, approaching the 7th month now. The lockdowns were completely, strictly in place. And these were the numbers in 1 month, 2 months. You look at what's happening with Israel. All the peaks are very clear. This is the Omicron wave and how they're again on the rise. These are the deaths, despite all the vaccinations. Deaths are again on the rise. They're at 13% of their peak and rising. They have reported 823 infections per 100,000 population as a 7-day rolling average as of yesterday midday. Their lockdowns. They have had the strictest lockdown, which ended somewhere in February when they saw Omicron waning. They were recommending closing some sectors completely, and it was a pan-national lockdown. Now, since March, there is either no lockdown or there is, in this small sliver, no data available for a lockdown. Again, if you look at Omicron numbers, and if you look at numbers now, when there are no lockdown measures, the numbers have still not risen to the same level, even though they are rising. If you look at vaccine boosters administered per 100 people, I'm talking about boosters now, I'm not talking about the primary regime. As of July 1st, you look at these darker shade countries, these are the ones which have secondary vaccination protocols also. Australia is going through a bad one also. Look at Europe, places where Omicron is rising, and look at this part where probably even the primary vaccination series is not complete, the sub-Saharan belt. And keep this map in mind when you look at the daily new confirmed cases per million as of 26th of June. Do you see that the I shouldn't be saying it, but the vaccinated countries are the most affected countries. Is the vaccine working? Definitely. I am 100% for vaccination, but I would also like to examine data logically and see what boosting has done for these countries. If you look at the last week, 24th June, 25th June, 26th June, 27th June, 28th June, India's numbers have been rising. The 7-day rolling average has been rising from about 13,490 to about 14,500. But you see where this is. As of 1st of July, it has from 14,500, it has risen to 15,500. In 1 week, we have seen this growth, and the new cases are, except on 27th and perhaps 25th, and that might be a weekend issue. I have not checked the dates, but these 2 days, the new cases have been less than the 7-day rolling average, else it has always been higher than the 7-day rolling average, which means that it is growing, albeit at a very small rate. The hospitalizations are not growing, ICU admissions are not growing, deaths are not growing. So all this data begs some very pertinent questions. Why are we not having a new pandemic since December, January, if these variants are indeed causing the numbers that they are causing? They haven't yet done anything to overwhelm our medical systems. Why is that? Is the immune memory now allowing us to respond to the virus in a proportionate manner? Isn't risk stratification the right way forward? Now, we must understand that the current vaccines are built against the original ancestral Wuhan strain spike. They are not effective against emerging variants, but, and we have several studies on that, they continue to cross-react with myocardium, muscle, and endothelium. We also must understand that the logic given by most guidelines for vaccinating, boosting, is that the antibody titers are falling. Circulating antibody titers are not an indicator of immune competence. So what are really the reasons to vaccinate? And are the vaccines working? The reasons to vaccinate would be that we have to prevent infections in both the population and the healthcare delivery workers. We have to prevent a community transfer. We have to also prevent an overwhelm of medical systems. And if at all the system is going to deal with more number of cases, we should have providers able to provide healthcare. We also have to see that the immune naive population with an inappropriate immune, hyperimmune, hypercoagulable response should be protected. But what is the cost of vaccinating everybody? Vaccine requirements as of now have high financial costs. Also, it is a substantial infringement of individual rights, and I'm not saying this. I'm going to present papers to you from UK which are saying this. These are non-trivial risks, they say, that are associated with blanket universal boosting and immunizing. Also, there is potential autoimmunity from molecular mimicry between the SARS-CoV-2 spike and human proteins. So the TQLP motif in spike and thrombopoietin share antibody binding properties. The ELDKY motif is shared with multiple human proteins, including the PRKG1 causing clotting disorders and tropomyosin causing myocarditis and cardiac complications. So the current vaccine definitely has been proven not to work against emerging variants like Omicron, and also has been proven to continue to cross-react with myocardium. This paper from BMJ is a very balanced, very nuanced paper which talks about the fallacies of thought and logic which are dictating current public health mandates. We won't even call them guidelines at the moment. So their take is that vaccine mandates discriminate against natural immunity, and there are some fallacies of thought and logic operational here at a public health level. There are two fallacies that they want to examine. One is the anti-vaxxer fallacy, which says that because it is natural, it should be superior. So that fallacy is also wrong. It is natural to develop robust immunity from natural infections, but it is also natural to die from serious and severe natural infections, which is what was happening with definitely Delta, possibly Alpha, and also Wuhan strains. Omicron, however, has changed the story. Fallacy number 2, acquiring immunity through natural infections is superior. So it is prudentially, logically, mentally irrational to choose to be infected rather than be vaccinated for those who have risk factors that can cause a bad outcome. But fallacy number 3, vaccine acquired immunity is blanket superior to natural immunity. Now, this also is a fallacy. This has been the rationale for public health approach, that because it is vaccine induced, this is superior. However, the real logical statement, non-fallacious statement should read, natural and vaccine acquired immunity are roughly comparable. These policies should recognize proof of natural immunity as a sufficient basis for exemption to vaccination mandation. But if you have to rationalize vaccination policy, then you should also know that for sure the vaccine is adding some benefit, and that this benefit is enough to exempt someone. So let's see. Let's forget about the financial cost for the moment. The talk in the West on infringement of human rights, on individual rights, is a big one right now. In India, we don't even think on those lines, but we can forget about that also. Let's say that the vaccination mandates have been justified by antibody titers alone and their decline. Now, that is an illogical way to mandate vaccination or boosting. We know that the natural immunity induces memory B cells and T cells, and the T cell responses are more robust and longer lasting. The statement vaccine induced immunity in the real world is waning is justifiable, provable, and tenable. Now, it is also equally important to see that there are emerging immune escape and vaccine escape variants. The reduced immune response and immune exhaustion has been documented with vaccines by responsible organizations like the European Medical Association. We have to then balance the necessity versus the uncertainty of the times. The necessity would be that it offers additional, significant, provable benefit to mandate boosting. The uncertainty is that we have to resolve whether this is causing more harm than good. So measure the harm versus benefit. It is time now, with more than 2 years into the pandemic, to move away from emergency use authorization. Now we don't have emergencies to use any mandates. Generate and examine real world evidence of the benefit of vaccines, examine real world evidence of the adverse effects from the vaccines, rationalize the risk benefit equation, and create guidelines that protect, rather than mandates that could potentially harm individuals and population herds. Vaccination exemption could be justified if there is sufficient evidence that vaccination is not offering additional benefit in those with a history of natural infection. So this is what we must then examine. This is another paper from, so they have pooled analysis from global figures. They've seen about, I think, 238 hospitals. Equivalency of protection from natural immunity versus fully vaccinated people. This is verbatim quoted from the paper. While vaccines are highly effective at protecting against infection and severe COVID-19 disease, this review demonstrates that natural immunity in recovered individuals is at least equivalent to protection afforded by complete vaccination of a naive population. So, what is the logic? Is it to prevent reinfection? Is there a blanket sterilizing protection by use of vaccination and boosting? Does vaccination offer protection from long COVID, which could justify boosting? Now, there are these papers by Abu Ratad in Qatar. They examined in 2020 December about 133,266 subjects. So this is post-Delta. But pre-Omicron. And they found that reinfection rate was 0.18%. And this is all reinfections that they measured in these subjects. But of these, there were only 0.04% who were symptomatic. Now, what is operational here is immune education and immune memory. Lavandi et al. Examined 238 hospitals data with 131,733 patients, and they suspected reinfection in only 0.2%. Now, with this systematic review of literature, they have come to the conclusion that as of May 2021, 0.1 to 1% is the incidence of reinfection, and there is no report of increasing risk over time. So the relevant questions to ask then become that, does previous infection protect to the same degree as what we consider a full vaccination? If so, vaccine should not be mandated for those who are previously infected. Is there an incremental benefit of vaccinating previously infected individuals? Now, why these questions become important is that with Omicron, we are finding levels of infection which are unprecedented. We are finding seroprevalence to the tune of 98%, 99%, 99.7%. Is there any risk reduction? Now, in absolute terms, around the beginning of the pandemic, 218 individuals needed to be vaccinated to prevent one case of COVID annually. But now, this number has come down to 6.5. Now it is 218 individuals, and initially it was 6.5 individuals. Post Omicron, you have to vaccinate 218 people to prevent one case. And pre-Delta, you had to vaccinate 7 people to prevent one infection. The other point to note is that even though vaccine immunity seems to be waning, natural immunity seems to be persisting. And according to this paper, they have assessed it up to 8 months post-infection, and they found natural immunity to be robust. And these are post-natural immunity antibodies against the receptor binding domain IgG type, the receptor binding domain specific memory B cells, the specific CD4 T cells, and the specific CD8 T cells, and the spike IgA, which also offers mucosal immunity. You find that even up to 6 months, the cellular component of immune memory is robust and persisting. Immune memory from either primary infection or immunization is the source for protection from subsequent infections in a given population. Again, the reinfection rates among patients who have previously tested positive for COVID. This is a retrospective cohort study. The vaccine protection varies from 62 to 95%, depending on what study you're quoting. Natural infection offers about 85% protection, depending on which study you are quoting. With this, again, natural infection becomes somewhat comparable to vaccine protection. At least in terms of immune memory, both should be treated at par. Let's look at what happens to natural infection and what happens to the reinfection rates among previously infected cohorts. So, natural infection positively is protective. The protection increases over time. You see, reinfection rates are falling over a period of 6 to 8 months and then stabilizing near the baseline. Natural immunity is comparable to vaccine-induced immunity, and protection against reinfection is lowest around 4 to 5 months post initial infection, but after that, it continuously rises beyond 6 to 8 months to come to an immune memory point. This paper is from June 2022, so that means it is very current, very relevant. Risk of reinfection and hospitalizations in individuals with natural and hybrid immunity. This is from Sweden. The question they wanted to ask was, does vaccination offer additional protection? They wanted to comprehensively analyze the data by examining 3 cohorts. The first was unvaccinated individuals with previous confirmed infection. That means this is a pure natural immunity. And this is 2 million, 39,106 people. Previous infection with 1 dose of vaccine, which is 962,318 individuals. Previous infection with 2 doses of vaccine, which is 567,810 individuals. So they have examined this data for those who have natural immunity versus those who have no immunity, those who have hybrid immunity with 1 dose of the vaccine and with 2 doses of the vaccine. Each of these cohorts have been matched pairwise by year of birth and gender. So we can't say that like the women are having a better outcome and you're comparing more women to men, or so these are matched by age and gender. The outcomes that they wanted to document was infections from March 2020 till October 4, 2021. Again, of note, this is pre-Omicron, and hospitalizations from the same time till September 5th, 2021. The mean follow-up here has been about 164 days. So if you see the graph A is natural immunity with 95% risk reduction with no attenuation of protection over the period of study, up to 20 months of study. This has been compared to no immunity at all, naive population. So there is an initial drop of protection after which it rises and then it is stable. Hybrid immunity with 1 dose, there is an initial bump which improves protection, and then the protection falls to about 45% over the period of study. Hybrid immunity with 2 doses offers again an initial bump of 66% and then falls to about 56% with no attenuation over the duration of study. The risk reduction is less if the age is more. Surprisingly, if education is more, I don't know why that is so, or for those people who have home help. But what about the risk of long COVID then? Now, in these, I don't have to say it. The study is saying that the natural immunity is offering 95% protection and the hybrid immunity is offering about 55 to 65% protection. So this again is a paper that is released on 18th of June by Dr. Tim Spector, the person who has launched the Zoe study, the Zoe symptom tracker. They have examined cases. These are direct quotes from the paper. They have examined the number of confirmed cases between December 2021 and March 2022. Now, this has included Omicron period. They have also examined a separate cohort, which they call the Delta period. They have seen that Omicron causes less severe acute illness than previous variants in vaccinated populations. But they also say that Delta and Omicron age matched people with comorbidities ranging around 20% significantly show that Omicron causes long COVID in less than 5%, whereas Delta caused it in more than 10%. So if you look at the age groups, this is for all age groups. This is for the working population. Let's focus here on the working population. In Omicron, the level of protection is an odds ratio of 0.4, with vaccine less than 3 months, an odds ratio of about 0.3, with vaccine about 6 months, and with more than 6 months, 0.23. So here we are looking at an 80% protection. Now, this is important. We are looking at an about 80% protection for a vaccine which is more than 6 months old, about 70% protection when the vaccine is about 3 to 6 months old, and about 60% protection when vaccine is about 3 months old. Counterintuitively, recent vaccination is less protective than longer period between vaccination and infection. More is not better. If you, again, this is a 2022 paper. Among the cases in Omicron period, about 2,500 people, 4.5% reported that they had experienced long COVID, compared with 4,469, which was about 10.8% people in the Delta period, according to the analysis published in Lancet. Long COVID risk is lower with Omicron than with Delta. The study finds 4% with Omicron versus 10% with Delta. Now, in view of all these evidences, we must at least be able to say that natural immunity is at least comparable to vaccine-acquired immunity. We must follow first principles, work towards risk stratification and individualization of mandates, and follow the very basic mandate of medicine: first, do no harm. And that's where I would like to stop. I'm presenting data as it is. I'm not saying you should get boosted. I am not saying you should not get boosted. I'm saying follow the logic and follow the science. As we stand today, Omicron is showing rising numbers of emerging Omicron variants. And it's not showing increased morbidity nor increased mortality. In view of that, mandating vaccines which potentially do not work against present variants and potentially do cause autoimmune cross reactivity with significant proteins in the human body, there are things that we have to examine and speak for or against. I was very disheartened by the present FDA CDC controversy where they are mandating vaccination, boosting for younger and younger age groups. Even Anthony Fauci has had COVID now, and he took Paxlovid, and then he had Paxlovid rebound, which was worse than the pre-Paxlovid primary infection. He's been vaccinated and boosted 3 times or 4 times, I don't know. We must follow logic, and we must follow data, and we must follow the science for sure. And we must examine everything that we get with the view of even changing our own opinions. I'm not so, when it came up, when it was a novel virus, when the hyperimmune reaction, the hypercoagulable response was causing skyrocketing mortality, morbidity, and even long COVID, vaccination was the logical way forward. We don't often measure how many common colds a population is having. And I'm not comparing Omicron to common cold by any yardstick. But what I'm saying is now there is immune memory. And if there is immune memory, whether natural or vaccine induced, we must stratify the risk, see what is the benefit of boosting, vaccinating, increasing number of people, and whether that is offering any material benefit. If it is, if you think the risk is high, please boost. If you think that the risk is manageable, then we have seen that the cell-mediated immunity, whether B or T, is offering better protection 6 months down the line than 3 months from the boost. So I would say, in fact, when the cases are rising, you should not be boosting. Because at that time, you are making the immune system work more by recognizing the vaccine also, and possibly committing an antigenic sin. And I know this is too much to swallow, but that is...
It's definitely it's a nice and fresh take on the vaccine. I think on the bottom of our our understanding, maybe we do have this concept that when the cases are rising, we should not be boosting, we should not be vaccinating. But it's just something that's coming from the I don't know, we can't really place the logic and the science to it, piece by piece. But yes, of course, it is.
You got muted, Meenakshi. Yeah.
Sorry. So that happened to me twice today, so I have lost my chain of thought. But yes, it's a fresh take, and I do agree with you to a certain extent, although I am not able to completely fit in the pieces of the puzzle perfectly, but somewhere it does make sense.
So the reason why I am saying this, the reason is that the vaccines, the present vaccines, are against the original spike. And the mutated spike is not responding to that vaccine. When we eliminated polio, when we eliminated smallpox, when we did it because it was a sterilizing vaccine. It was a sterilizing immunity. This vaccine, we have changed the goalpost. We said, Acha, it prevents severe disease. Now, the disease is not severe. So what is the logic of vaccinating? Chalo, we will vaccinate because we want to generate herd immunity. So फिर herd immunity from natural or hybrid means has to be compared to the vaccine immunity, and we have to figure out whether that is offering any advantage. जब वो spike काम नहीं कर रही है और वो spike cross react कर रही है, so then the mandate of first do no harm should prevail in our minds.
I think there is no ambiguity that natural infection is much more having immunization than the vaccine. But problem is because of statutory the conditions. See, even those who don't want to have the vaccination, they have to be vaccinated because of this.
Which is what I'm saying, sir. जो public health mandates हैं अभी, they need to factor in natural or hybrid immunity, and the vaccination guidelines must then use risk stratification rather than mandation.
Especially if you travel abroad या कुछ और conditions में.
अमेरिका में तो कोई लॉजिक ही नहीं फॉलो हो रहा. मतलब
ये आपको इंडिया से बाहर जाना तब वैक्सीन लेनी पड़ेगी, उसमें आप जा ही नहीं सकते. You can't go.
No, but I think a lot of the countries also accept a negative RT-PCR report as well.
And they have dropped vaccine mandates now. Europe largely has.
Yeah.
You don't need current RT-PCR report, but you have to show your vaccination chart.
No, RT-PCR. Europe is asking for an RT-PCR. If you're not boosted, they are asking for an RT-PCR.
And they're asking for your original vaccination.
Yes.
Your country mandated vaccination. If it is full, they're accepting it. But I don't know if I have those slides, but US seems to be working on boosting and vaccinating everyone irrespective of the data, and that their data seems to be driven by the reports that the vaccine companies are generating, which is a matter of concern. And मतलब क्या कहना चाहिए, कुछ कह भी नहीं सकते.
Even in India, in a short period in UP, it was mandated to come to business or shop, whatever it is, only when you are vaccinated. आप वैक्सीनेटेड नहीं है तो आप दुकान नहीं खोल सकते. आपको वहाँ
सर ये कब की
पहले की है.
ये पहले की
तो वो तब की, और ये तब की बात जरूरी भी था. मतलब जब हम बात कर रहे हैं वुहान और डेल्टा, अब
during Delta,
we saw a very bad wave. The response was a hyperimmune, hypercoagulable response, and that was because there was no immune memory. So generating that immune memory was needed. But now, whether that immune memory came from natural infection or from vaccination or a combination, now there is immune memory. And also we are seeing that the response is not a hyper response. So फिर अब logic dictates के कुछ तो फर्क तरीके से देखो इसको.
Dr. Nidhi, I am Dr. Vinay Arora.
हाँ जी सर.
नमस्कार.
नमस्कार.
ये बड़ा कंट्रोवर्शियल हो गया. जब भी केसेस बढ़ते हैं, जैसे पेपर में आना शुरू हो जाता है, कोविड केसेस आर ऑन इंक्रीज एंड पीपल गो फॉर बूस्टर although they are infected previously in that wave. अभी भी ऐसा ही हुआ है, बूस्टर को पिकअप मिल गया है.
हाँ सर, मैं मैं जान रही हूँ, इसीलिए मैंने ये कंट्रोवर्शियल टॉपिक
हाँ.
आज उठाया था, बिकॉज मुझे पता है कि इसको जस्टिफाई करना जो है वो मतलब इमोशन से अगर चलें तो ठीक है, बूस्ट, लेकिन अगर आप लॉजिक से चलो तो जब आप लॉजिक से चलो तो जब आपको प्रीवियस इन्फेक्शन है तो प्रीवियस इम्यून मेमोरी है.
हाँ जी.
प्रीवियस इम्यून मेमोरी एक स्टडी में 8 महीने और एक स्टडी में 20 महीने, 2 साल ऑलमोस्ट, 24 महीने का हुआ ना, 2 साल. तो ड्यूरेशन ऑफ द पैंडेमिक इम्यून मेमोरी कॉम्पिटेंट है टू डील विद इन्फेक्शंस. वैक्सीन के साथ वी आर नॉट प्रिवेंटिंग इन्फेक्शन, इट्स नॉट स्टेरिलाइजिंग इम्यूनिटी. वैक्सीन के साथ वी आर प्रिवेंटिंग सिवियर इन्फेक्शन.
Yes.
इम्यून मेमोरी से भी वी आर प्रिवेंटिंग सिवियर इन्फेक्शन, उसी से तो कर रहे हैं. तो अगर किसी को elderly male with hypertension, with diabetes, with obesity, with comorbidities, and you want to take an individual call, okay, boss, you should get boosted because you might need it. Yes, doctors should be able to take that individual call. But right now, with public health mandates, the individualization of medicine and logic of risk stratification
आपका
is
freeze
not
कर गया है.
working.
No, we can hear her.
आपका फ्रीज कर गया था सर. And that's what I know.
No, yes, I think we've
दूसरी
been
बात
talking
ये है
about
मैम
this.
कि जो इंटरनेशनल ट्रेवल के लिए आपको ये बूस्टर का भी सर्टिफिकेट चाहिए एज मैंडेटेड बाय द गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया.
आप को नहीं, ये gradually, as Meenakshi pointed out, Europe has already stopped it, and gradually these will stop. If you think that traveling is more important and you need to be boosted, get boosted. That is an individual request. But what I'm saying is that population mandates need to examine the data. And I know I'm putting forth a very controversial point of view, but I feel like Omicron is working like a live attenuated vaccine. I feel like the end point of vaccination is immune memory, immune education, and whether it is from natural infection or from a previous infection, vaccination, it should at least be treated on a comparable scale.
Very valid points, Dr. Nidhi. I think during when the monkeypox cases were around, I think they're still around in Europe. So at that time, there was this talk, that the smallpox vaccine is still working. So the educated patient actually says that when it has been working for so long, why do we need to get boosted? And I think it's so heartwarming to hear that from patients, because it's very difficult to get across to certain patients that yes, booster is not required. You've just had an infection maybe 6 months ago, and even that is going to help you. So again, as I said, brilliant points, and things that we are just thinking of, you're putting them down on pen and paper and on these slides, and it's backed with the finest data. So thank you very much, Dr. Nidhi, for doing this with us every week. A big thank you to all of you for joining in and keeping this show alive. We'll be back again next Sunday. Until then, goodbye.
Thank you so much.